Hey, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Just-in-Time Cafe's webinar. I'm Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just-in-Time Cafe, and I'll be your moderator today. And today's webinar is how to leverage the role of emotions in lean coaching. And our host today is Dorsey Sherman. Let me tell you a little bit about Dorsey. She is a leadership and continuous improvement coach at her organization, Model Consulting. She has 20 years of experience in creating positive change in healthcare, nonprofit, and government organizations. She's a board certified coach through Case Western Reserve University, and her current focus is individualized leadership and executive coaching. Welcome, Dorsey.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. We welcome your participation. Dorsey's going to ask you questions. Dorsey will be asking you questions throughout, and we encourage you guys to participate. Videos of these webinars are available on our website. We post them all the Monday after the webinar, and our website is jitcafe.com, jitcafe.com, and they're under the webinar menu. You can see all the past webinars there too. So join us for our first activity by sharing where you guys are from. We want to know, how early it is, how late it is, how international you are. So go ahead and put that in the chat and I will see where you guys are. So we've got Jen, hello, from, where are you, Jen? Remind me, are you in Chicago? I think you're in Chicago. Jennifer says, yay, Dorsey. I know she's out in the Pacific Northwest. We've got Stephanie in New York, NYC. Alyssa, welcome, Alyssa, in Tacoma. Jen, yes, Ann Arbor, thank you, specifically. Corey in Winnipeg. Okay, now we're international, Dorsey. We've got Canada going with us. We've got Melissa in Colorado, Michael in Jacksonville, Florida. We've got Brenda in Montpelier, Vermont, Cindy in San Diego, Jennifer, also near Ottawa in Canada. Welcome, Jennifer. Great to have you. Jennifer reminds me she's in Portland. Thank you. Wendy in Cleveland, Jeff in Oklahoma City. Go Thunder. My nephew is the coach. Daniel in Cedar Rapids. Aha, Ari in Finland. We've got, I don't even know if we've had Finland before. Welcome, Ari. You are representing Finland. Enos in Portland, Imelda in Nashville, Pilar in San Diego. Welcome, Pilar. Kevin in San Diego. Welcome, Kevin. Evan in North Carolina. And Stacy in Central. Good Lord. And Olga wishing us a joyful day from St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm thrilled. This is a great list of folks here. And I am really excited to hear Dorsey's webinar. And so I'm going to hand the baton to you, Dorsey. I don't know if that's up or sideways or you got it.
Got it. Thanks, Elizabeth. So hi, everybody. It was fun to see some familiar names in the chat there and know that even though I can't see you, good to know you're out there. So as Elizabeth said, I'm a board certified coach. And so right now I'm working primarily one-on-one with people for their own growth and development. But really my background has been more heavily focused on lean. And really that's what got me into the broader field of coaching for sure. So I'd like to share some of what I've learned about emotional intelligence and coaching and kind of the intersection with lean. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. And what I like is that when we think about emotions, it's like, well, that has no place in lean. Like lean's all about data and facts and scientific thinking and experimentation, and like emotions, that would be an obstacle to lean thinking. We can't, that would almost be counterintuitive to think about anything emotional to do with lean. Well, Yes, and here's the problem. We're all the humans, and it turns out emotions are part of the package that comes along with it. We can't put them aside. And so the more we learn and understand kind of this emotional landscape that we all have, and among not just ourselves, but our teams, I think the more effective we can be at work. So with that, I'll dive in. So kind of the case for emotional intelligence is this idea of this iceberg. So at the tip of the iceberg is really technical competence. Things like lean, problem solving skills, accounting, business planning, functional knowledge, other cognitive abilities are really important. But emotional intelligence, there's been tons of research that shows that's really the difference between sort of the average and the great leader. And Daniel Goleman wrote sort of the definitive book about emotional intelligence. And what he describes is these two key pieces about awareness and then regulation. So awareness about your own emotions and others, and then the ability to regulate your own and others. It's sort of this personal competence and then social competence. And so when we think of great leaders, the words that people use to describe them, like they cared about me, they listened, they were hopeful, they were visionary, those are all kind of emotional intelligence competencies. And to go a little bit deeper, it's kind of the capacity to recognize your own feelings and the feelings in others. These kind of four buckets are around self and then relationship. So this first piece is self-awareness, which really means knowing yourself, knowing your emotions, and then accurate self-assessment, and then how do others see you, which is sometimes a little more tricky. And then understanding others. Oops, I hit it once and then it doesn't go, and then it keeps going. Okay. And then empathy is kind of this foundational skill around when it comes to understanding others, sort of perspective taking, putting yourself in someone's shoes, being willing to understand their point of view, and then managing relationships, so developing others, influencing others, and then managing yourself. So there's kind of these quadrants, if you can see them, are these axes. So this top, the blue and the yellow are kind of about awareness, and then the orange and the green are about management and regulation. So awareness and regulation of yourself and others are kind of the two pieces. And what we know as you go around the circle, starting with self-awareness, is that when these are kind of well developed, you have a positive impact on those people around you. You really create resonance with your teams, and people with high emotional intelligence are people that are seen to be highly effective. So what does any of this have to do with lean? Like, who cares? To me, the intersection here is around learning. Part of our job in coaching and in lean in general is really developing the capacity of other people. And that means, how do people learn? So one of my old friends, Tony Benner, and she actually, it was so funny, Tracy O'Rourke met her in San Diego recently and posted something on LinkedIn about it. But anyway, Tony's the one who taught me this, that lean really has this letter missing, which is R. Lean is really about learning. And I think we can all recognize that part of our job is to help, in lean coaching, is to help people think about new ways to work and think and do their job. And so the role of emotion when we're talking about problem solving and innovation is really important. And basically, the bottom line is that negative emotion dramatically impacts our ability to learn. So what happens neurologically and in terms of our nervous system is that a negative emotion activates the sympathetic nervous system. And that really triggers a number of hormonal responses. And that sort of shuts down our ability to learn or change in any way. So people go into a fight or flight or freeze survival mode, and their creativity and their openness to new ideas are greatly diminished. The likelihood that any change will be made or sustained is extremely low. So I just want to say that again, the likelihood of making or sustaining behavioral change is extremely low. And so what's happened is our cognition, our creativity, and our concentration are impaired. And I think when you first think of this fight or flight, you might be thinking of like a dramatic conflict, like somebody yells at you, or like, there's some sort of big conflict between someone. And it actually can be much more subtle than that. In fact, these kind of feelings of, there's this spectrum around irritation, embarrassment, nervousness, even kind of mild negative emotions still have the same impact in terms of deflating our cognition, our creativity, and our concentration. On the other hand, positive emotions enhance learning. And so this activates this relaxation. It's the opposite of fight or flight, and it's rest and digest. And so here we have the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, and that stimulates adult neurogenesis. So neurogenesis meaning the growth of new neurons. So our brain actually grows when we're feeling positive, and the opposite things happen. Cognition, creativity, concentration are elevated. And so it's interesting because I think a lot of lean is focused on problems and what's not working and how do we do it better. And so it's interesting to think about how different emotions can be activated by different types of coaching. So I use the word coaching, and I just ask you to pause a little bit on that word. It is completely ubiquitous. It seems like now there is that word is used in a lot of different contexts. So for me, I wanted to pull it apart a little bit. And I think these are all things called coaching. So people tell you what to do and they say, well, I coached him to screw the screw in this way. And I coached him that he wasn't effective in that last meeting. And I'm coaching him by telling him my experience in this role. And I'm coaching a team to achieve a improvement outcome. These next few ones you might be less familiar with. There's so I did my training at Case Western in Cleveland, and they have one of the only coaching research labs in the country, which I love anything like research and data and analysis. And so I found that super interesting. And they sort of coined this term coaching for compliance, which I'm going to go into in a minute. And then I kind of pulled out this coaching to teach a skill, and then coaching for compassion. So what we know is that different types of coaching activate different emotional responses. So a little bit more about coaching for compliance and coaching for compassion. First of all, the goal of all of these things, I would say it's kind of the same. The goal is learning, growth, change, and development, right? But the impact is significantly different. And so when I say coaching for compliance, what that mean and what the research at Case Western found is that this is focused on meeting an external standard. So it's like, this is Dorsey, and this is how I want Dorsey to be behaving in terms of maybe her communication or her problem-solving skills or her conflict management, whatever it is. There's some gap that needs to be closed. And this is actually the default style of coaching. Performance reviews look like this. Doctor-patient relationships. I mean, patients are literally called non-compliant, when they don't follow the treatment plan. And even a key point here, even well-intentioned. So I don't want to paint this as like, these are a bunch of mean people with sticks, coaching you in this aggressive way. This can be very well-intentioned. And I don't mean to necessarily paint it as a bad thing. It's just that we do know coaching for compliance, even well-intentioned, tends to trigger a defensive response and kind of has that shutting down of our cognition and our creativity and ability to change. So on the flip side is coaching for compassion, which is really distinct in that you're helping the coachee find their own way. So versus compliance is focused on closing a gap, and here's the external standard we're trying to get you to meet. Coaching for compassion is, where do you want to go? What's important to you? What are your, goals and aspirations? There is an emphasis on positive emotion, focusing on strengths and what's working, and tapping into internal motivation, and looking at the desire to change is greater than obligation. So I am curious, where do you think lean coaching fits in? Oops. Between these two, and I'll ask you to respond in the chat, and Elizabeth, you can help me.
So the question is, where does lean coaching fit between coaching for compliance and coaching for compassion?
What are they? I'm just curious what the audience sees in these two different descriptions of coaching. And
well, Jennifer sees both of these in lean.
That's why I think it's interesting. Yeah, both.
Wendy saw for groups compliance, for one-on-one coaching, it's compassion. Alyssa said she feels like leaders I've worked for feel that belt programs necessitate coaching for compliance. Interesting. Jeff says both. Angela says both as situationally driven. Purpose for active coaching. Stephanie thought it could be both. Heather thought both. Jennifer said 100% coaching for compassion for sure. Pilar said, I think it depends on the coach.
What interesting. Right.
Yeah. Ina said in between. And then Jennifer said from the change management perspective, coaching for compassion, and Gina thought both.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I think it is both. And that's why I want to pose it at not necessarily negative. It's more about awareness around what you're trying to achieve and how effective you're going to be. Knowing that this heavy emphasis on compliance in terms of long-term behavioral change is not really effective. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but thanks for chiming in. Here's the reason, part of the reason I find this so interesting is that despite good intentions of lean coaching, I have experienced and delivered and witnessed lean coaching that was well-intentioned but completely ineffective because of the negative emotion that it created. And I think part of this is lean coaching can be very focused on rules. They're like, is this technical skill and you have to do it a certain way. This is what a process map has to look like. This is what, you have to have your updated data. You've got to go to Gemba. You got to have a data on your target condition. You got to make sure you get to the root cause. You have to have a process metric, don't start with the solution. And of course, that's all good and important. And of course, these rules and this whole technical body of knowledge is there for a reason, because left to our own devices, we have so many cognitive biases that we're not good at solving problems. We, jump to conclusions and make assumptions and are kind of ineffective at solving problems effectively. And that's lean is sort of the antidote to that. And so that's all true. And the rules can really turn into this kind of compliance auditor, policeman-like coaching that's focused on doing it right. And that's the most important thing, is that we do this, do this lean problem solving activity in the right way. And again, the impact of that is you have negative emotion. Nobody's really learning anything. So a little bit more about what's wrong with coaching for compliance, because, as I talk about, everybody does performance reviews almost, doctor-patient relationships, teaching. I always kind of imagine that football coach on the sidelines yelling and screaming, like the word compassion doesn't really come to mind. And what's the problem with that? And there isn't one necessarily. Those people may get results. I think the problem is it's doesn't tend to be long-term kind of sticky change. So if you want to get results in the short term, this compliance effect or this compliance approach can be effective, but what are you really trying to create? in your organization, and what's the goal you're really looking for, and understanding the impact of both. So what a little bit more about what happens, this negative feedback and corrective kind of coaching creates this defensiveness. So there's this really cool study that they highlighted in the Harvard Business Review, where they did functional MRIs of two groups of people, and one was kind of given positive feedback about what they're doing well and what's working well and what do they want to improve and what are the opportunities that they want to look at. And the other was told what was wrong and what needed to be fixed. And so in the one getting the negative feedback, that amygdala, the fight or flight part of the brain, lit up, the threat was perceived, activity in the brain narrowed, and this access to neural circuits was limited. On the other hand, in those that had this positive approach, this parasympathetic nervous system, they could see it was activated, and it showed this increase in cognitive functioning, perceptual openness. So we really learn when we pay attention to what's working, and we're asked to cultivate it intelligently. Excuse me. So you might be thinking, this isn't me. Like, I'm a compassionate person. I'm nice. I don't have this vision of myself as looking for compliance in any way. And I'm sure that's true. So what I want to convey is a little bit more about coaches is kind of the well-intentioned, but not necessarily a positive impact. As I've talked about this idea a little bit over the last year, these are some of the things that people have said to me about their experiences as a coach or being coached. So a lean expert was coaching me in front of a group of peers. I didn't know the answer. I was embarrassed. I didn't think I was smart enough to be there. My brain went blank. I got off my last coaching session and I wanted to cry. My first time at a lean conference, coaches were criticizing their learners for all they were doing wrong, and I felt intimidated. I felt awkward, confused, and frustrated. And so what I think is interesting are these are all like nice people. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like there's these mean ogres walking around being coaches. And they still had, so I think that's the interesting part, is like the hair trigger, like the sensitivity around activating negative emotions in the people that we're coaching. So I guess I'll pause here as well and ask you, have you ever been coached by someone where you experienced something like, overwhelm, frustration, fear, that kind of thing?
As we wait for this answers to this one, I wanted to give you a couple more
sure.
that I heard. One was Corey mentioned coaching for compliance might be quicker in achieving the number one desired result, but that does not mean it's better in the long term.
Yeah, great.
And let's see, you're getting Alyssa, absolutely have experienced negative emotion. Imelda, yes. And there was another comment earlier I wanted to relay to you. Daniel said for compassion coaching includes finding a way to align their personal goals with the company's. And then Jennifer said in response to this question, oh my God, this is what I experienced in my post-Toyota days. Textbook answers versus real experience. And Sam said, yes, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's what everybody says, which is pretty interesting. When I ask this question, I mean, most people are like, yeah, I definitely have. I mean, somebody, when I asked this in a previous presentation, like just today, I had a hostile coaching cycle and used the word hostile, which is interesting. It impacted my work for the rest of the day. I don't even think lean is possible where I work. Workers shut down because the coaches are driving too hard. So thank you for sharing your experience.
There's a few more.
Okay, sure.
Jennifer said, I don't experience a negative emotion in a true coaching cycle where the coach is focused on allowing me to learn and supporting me versus teaching or telling me how to do something. So differentiating there. Sam said, even coaches who others praise so much, and then in a group coaching session, they didn't listen and were critical. So one-on-one might be different from group. Angela said, absolutely. And Olga said, eye-opening. Well-meaning coaching can actually focus on compliance coaching in some circumstances, not leading to long-term positive impact.
Yeah, great, thanks. So here's the other side of the coin, and that's what we know about positivity. So Barbara Fredrickson is this positivity research. She wrote this book. I mean, just the idea that she researched positivity, I think is so cool. But anyway, so it's kind of like, well, duh, yeah, positivity, like that feels good to feel like this positive emotion. And isn't that what we all want, is to be happy? So it's more than that. What she found and proved is it literally changes our brain. And specifically, what I think is fascinating, it expands the inventory. So for all you lean people, this is when inventory is good. Expands the inventory of thoughts and actions. And it's like, what could be more important as we strive for like creating more value for customers and strive for solving these complex problems and improving our organizations, is an expanded inventory of thoughts and actions. So she specifically found a sweet spot in this 5-to-1 ratio, which means 5 positive emotions for every 1 negative. And so this is important because it's not like I'm talking about like unicorns and rainbows and we're all hugging and like singing Kumbaya all the time. Like, and it's not the coach's job to create, you know, this environment, but it's a dosage issue. So it's interesting because a lot of people say like, oh, you've got to be uncomfortable to learn. And like Jim Stigler has this whole thing about productive struggle. And like, we need to be in the uncomfortable zone and it should be hard and we should be struggling in order to learn. Yes, and it is dosage. So you can have struggle, but it has to be largely this positive experience. And in fact, just speaking generally about looking at your day, looking at your life, when this woman studied people who were in this 5-to-1 spot, they were able to just create the life that they wanted to create. They had this broadening about ideas about what was possible, about trusting in the good intentions of others, opening awareness to this wider range of thoughts and actions. And so from a lean perspective, again, it's interesting to think about where are you in this dosage, you know, in terms of what your interactions or even you personally are experiencing. And so more specifically, things like joy spark the interest to play and to be creative. Interest sparks exploration and learning, and positivity makes us more open and creative. And again, translating to coaching for improvement, it just seems like sparking, igniting, maintaining, mining for positive emotion couldn't be more important in terms of the link to creativity and innovation and thinking about new ideas. We have to feel this hope and excitement and eagerness to move forward. I don't know if any of you were at Katacon in February, but there was an author who gave the keynote named BJ Fogg. He's a behavioral scientist and he wrote the book Tiny Habits. And what he said about habit formation, so we've all heard like, oh, you have to do a habit 21 times or whatever. There's all different numbers, 21 or 200 or whatever, however many times, and then you do it and then it's a habit. And what he found is that it's the positive emotion that creates the habit. You can do a habit or you can do an activity a very small number of times, but when you tag on this celebration, like he talks about a fist pump or like, yay, or whatever it is, you can create positive emotions, habits much more quickly when you attach the positive emotion to it. So I thought that was just a cool connection. So how do we move forward here? A little bit about relationships. So this what we know is that how do we create this 5-to-1? How do we create compassionate coaching relationships? So number one is understanding the impact of the relationship. So this is the intention of this slide is to show that this is talking about a leader employee relationships, but it applies to coaching as well. That relationship then gives the employee the feeling of perceived organizational support. And those two things combined are the drivers of satisfaction, commitment, retention, and discretionary effort, i.e. engagement. The relationships that people have in their organizations are the things that are driving, and that is what drives organizational performance. So when we focus all this time on the back end and how our KPIs and our results and how things are going, it's really what I offer is that it starts on the left side in terms of our relationships that we have as coaches and leaders, and that's what's impacting engagement and then performance. In terms of high quality connections. So connecting is really at the heart of human nature. And I think some of us think of connections at work and friendships and relationships as maybe like a nice to have, like, well, you need to follow your passion and do the work that's really important. And yeah, if you have cool coworkers and you have nice people and you get along, that's good too. Well, and so we sort of like overlook the importance of those relationships. But if people feel like they belong and generally care about each other, they will be more creative and resilient and eager to contribute to work. And so that's another just sort of connection about relationships and results. In terms of mining for positivity and a framework around that, I wanted to offer this. I don't know if any of you have heard of the field called appreciative inquiry, but there's a whole body of work and of course certification and facilitation that you can do around appreciative inquiry, and this SOAR is one model within that. And it's really about this positive kind of approach to thinking and coaching. And I always am reminded of the phrase, our organization will go in the direction of the questions that we ask. So I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about that. Instead of diving into root cause and problem definition, this is about talking about what's possible and what are we good at. So I'll show you a little more detail. So I'm sure familiar of the typical SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Instead, this is SOAR, strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So primarily starting not with what's wrong, but what is right, what is working, what are we good at, what are our dynamic capabilities, how are we contributing to the mission and vision, and then what's possible because of that. What is now possible because of our strengths? So it's like leveraging the strengths that are already working. And then what are our dreams and wishes? What are our wild aspirations and our preferred future? And how will we measure it? What are our meaningful outcomes? So this is kind of this cool framework that can be used like in a strategic planning perspective, but it can also be used within a department, within a team, and within an individual. So it kind of has this applicability across a range of contexts. So this is an example of using it one-on-one, where you can imagine kind of an organic conversation about somebody talking to you about what's going on or a dilemma they're having, and using this kind of SOAR model to walk your way through the conversation. What are your strengths as they relate to this possibility? Yeah, what would you like to create? Tell me about the possibility. What are your strengths as they relate to this possibility? What opportunities do you see? What do you most aspire to create? What action are you willing to commit to? So I just wanted to offer this because it can be like, what do I do? Like, okay, yeah, I want to be more positive and more compassionate. And I think the SOAR model is sort of this nice, concise framework to think about as kind of a helpful approach. So, when I started in terms of, oops, there's like a delay in my thing. Okay, so when I started, I talked about emotional awareness and regulation as these kind of cornerstones of emotional intelligence. And we have awareness of self, regulation of self, awareness of others, regulation of others. And so I think a really interesting question to think about from a lean perspective is, what is your purpose as a lean coach, especially since it could be a lot of different things. For instance, is it to solve problems? Are you accountable to get results? Are you there to develop people? Are you there to teach? And here's another question. Are you there as an expert? Is your role to have all the answers? Is your role to co-create a solution? Who is setting the agenda? Are you in charge of the agenda? And is learning happening via discovery or teaching? So I call all these questions to your attention because they're really beliefs and mindsets that then impact your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, and your outcomes. If I think it's my job, like I am accountable for the ROI on this project, to me, you show up differently than if it's my job to develop the capability of this team in achieving any challenge while we together strive for a return on investment. Like, to me, the framing of those things is different. The pressure on me is different. My mindset and my beliefs and my emotions and how I show up as a coach are different. And I think lean in particular, because of course we talk all about, it's not about tools, it's about people. And I would say yes, and you're also often there as the expert and kind of the leader and the person in charge of having all the answers. And so how does that impact your role as a lean coach? So I offer this framework, another one. There's a book called There we go. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Mary Lee Adams. I took a course from her, and she offers this framework about judger versus learner. And it's not good or bad. We all can be judgmental. We all can be in judger. What she means by that is a judger wants to know the answer. They like certainty. Enjoy being right, want to look good, avoid the discomfort of uncertainty, is opinionated, sees themselves as the expert. A learner, on the other hand, is okay not knowing the answer, is finding joy in exploring, discovering, learning, expects to learn and grow from mistakes, and kind of wonders, what am I missing? So again, it's not about good or bad. We can never turn off this judger. We're always kind of in one or the other of these spaces. But then the question is, how does where you are impact the questions you're asking yourself and the questions you're asking other people, and then the emotions you're creating among the people you're coaching? So for instance, and I write these as having thought them myself. So this word resistance is all the time in lean, right? Like, oh, these people are so resistant to change, which is, kind of being fully in judger. Why is this manager so ineffective? Why didn't she do what she said she was going to do, these 10 action items? And why didn't she do them? Why is no one listening to me and not doing what I say? Versus learner, who is coming at it from the perspective of, what are they thinking? Oops. What emotions am I experiencing? What assumptions am I making? How can I help them? I wonder why they aren't taking any action. So it's still a why question, but it is kind of like, I wonder what is happening. Why are they not taking any action? And so I offer those as kind of not necessarily good or bad, but just, again, some ways to think about your own thoughts and building awareness about your own emotions that you may be experiencing and bringing to the people that you're coaching. So how do I bring coaching for compassion into lean coaching? A couple things to think about, and one is focusing on this relationship first. So the relationship is really what this trusting and resonant relationship is what makes the learning possible. So how do you do that? How do you get to know a person, you care about them, ask them about their life, and develop a connection, which might require time outside of, specifically focusing on lean, focusing on what they're doing well. Does the learner, the coachee, really care about the problem or the challenge or the issue or the thing you're striving for? I bring this up, my work in healthcare. I had an experience where, I had multiple experiences where the organization has KPIs and kind of these strategic measures that they're striving for. Of course, in hospitals, every hospital is tracking patient satisfaction. And has goals around raising patient satisfaction. And that was then deployed throughout the organization. And so each nurse leader of the different units were accountable for, some percentage increase in patient satisfaction. And so I was working with different nurse leaders and trying to achieve this. And what I noticed, not explicitly, but implicitly through kind of sighs and shoulder shrugs and, basically inaction, is how do you really feel about this challenge? Like, what do you think about it? Well, come to find out that from a nursing perspective, they felt very wary about the goal being satisfying patients. As professionals, they saw their job as to treat patients and care for them and give them the highest quality care possible. But the word satisfy almost implies kind of like this pleasing thing. And it's like, well, I'm not here to please you. I'm here to take care of you. I'm here to give you the best care possible and make you healthy. But that is different than satisfying. And so what evolved was sort of this really interesting discussion about what are metrics and how do we make these organizational goals meaningful to you. And maybe it's not patient satisfaction. How do we have that conversation differently so that it's focused on providing the best quality care, whatever it is. But my point is that we sometimes have these organizational metrics and say, okay, we're going for this increase in decrease in cost, increase in revenue, increase in customer service. And it's like, do we really have connection about what the people we're assigning to move those goals really care about? Because this role of what I talked about earlier is excitement and eagerness and motivation to move forward is just so critical in the change process in terms of the ability to make and sustain change and improvement. So I really believe that the direction should come from learners themselves, from leaders. If the organization does a good job kind of cascading purpose and cascading meaning, I think that if that's done effectively, the learners or the middle managers can do a good job of setting their own improvement targets. So that's for another topic. But I do think that then plays into personal motivation. So this 5-to-1, so maintaining this is important in terms of focusing on the strengths, focusing on what's working well, focusing on what the person is doing well. And so I also offer you're not just managing the emotion of the other person, but again, of yourself. And so what are you doing well as a coach? And so I had an engagement yesterday with a client, and it felt kind of hard. And I got off and was sort of reflecting and writing some things down and thinking immediately about what I should have done differently, what I could have done better, and kind of had to stop myself to think, okay, what went really well? What did I do well there? And for me, I guess part of the reason this whole topic is interesting to me is like my default, and I almost feel like the default of lean is about finding what's wrong. It's like everything, what are all the problems and what do we need to fix? And like, this whole other perspective on how we can actually improve more when we focus on what's working well. What did you do really well? And how do you use those strengths to like leverage and stretch and grow and do even more? A little bit more about understanding emotion within yourself is this concept of emotional contagion. So we maybe think that we don't necessarily impact other people, but this concept of emotional contagion is basically that, like just like COVID, we can pass emotions from one person to another. And I think you can relate to that if you've had a conversation with a friend. It's like who's really positive and hopeful and passionate and motivating, you walk away like feeling a little buoyed. And similarly, if you're with someone who's like deflated or, fearful or anxious, you kind of can walk away feeling the same way. So this kind of makes intuitive sense. We've all experienced the boss who's frustrated or angry and annoyed, and you watch this mood in the room downgrade from neutral to cautious to fearful to disengaged. And so it's not just curious, it affects organizational results. Because what we know is that this increase in anxiety and the increase in this negative emotion erodes mental abilities. Like we just can't be effective. And so, this positive emotion creates all the satisfaction at work and engagement and problem solving. And so these bad moods, whether it's us as leaders and coaches, are kind of like bad for business, and the fact that how they impact other people, even when you don't realize it. We've all heard the power of the nonverbal cues and the impact that they can have on other people and how we can sense and feel the emotions of others. So a little more about kind of these specific habits of coaching for compassion. So another fascinating piece of neuroscience is we have these two networks in our brain. One is analytical, and it's called this task positive network. And the other is the empathic, so empathy. And here's what I think is absolutely fascinating. They suppress each other. So when your task positive network is activated, your empathic network is suppressed, and vice versa. So much of lean work is very analytical focused. It's focused on tasks and getting things done and doing it technically right, that we can really disconnect from our empathy. And so it's not about right and wrong. Like we can't go around being empathetic all the time and never being analytical and focus on tasks and completing jobs. But it's, first of all, recognizing the difference in those networks and being able to toggle between them. So questions like, how are you today? Like kind of basic. And I put that on there just to say like, okay, it's 3:00. We're here for a coaching cycle. I know I only have 30 minutes or I only have an hour and I have 30 things I have to talk to you about. Or, it reminds me of you write the whole email and then you look back and you're like, I better say like, hi, how are you? Or something at the beginning. Like, let me go back and reread that, because we get so focused on tasks that our empathic network is totally suppressed. And so I think it's really interesting, the word toggle, to think about this toggle switch between we have to intentionally connect with people and realize kind of what space we're in, if we're in this like analytical focus or in the empathic focus. So very simple connection skills like, how are you? Here's what you did well. I've often had the experience with that how are you question where someone's not good, they're having a really bad day, they're really stressed, they're overwhelmed, they didn't do what they said they were going to do, whatever it is. And you ask, how are you? And 5 minutes later, you kind of say, are you sure you want to continue? Because we certainly don't have to have this conversation today. The other thing, so Lily Boyanova, if some of you know her, she's part of Women in Lean, and I was second coaching her as she was coaching another learner in Toyota Kata. And at the end of her session, she would say to the learner, how was that? And it was this space for kind of implicit feedback to be like, I didn't understand these 10 things, or I felt really confused and overwhelmed, or that felt really good. It's kind of this cool question, this little like mini plus delta, like how was that? And so a little bit about asking for feedback. in my work as a leadership coach, we always do a process of getting feedback about strengths from other people, as well as, areas where they could be more effective. 100% of the time, people are surprised by the feedback they get about the impact that they're having on other people. 100%. And it's not to say it's all negative. It's not like, oh, I didn't realize I was being a jerk. Sometimes it's like the really positive impact that you're having with your strengths that you didn't even know. Every single person is surprised by the feedback they get on the impact they're having on other people. So I encourage you to build in little kind of like micro moments to learn more about that. And with that, I just sort of end with, isn't it just about intention? So this is another kind of thing that people have said to me as I talk about this, like, well, my intention is to develop people and to teach them and to support them. And isn't really that the most important thing? And if I have a good intention, then I can kind of compassionately coach for compliance, right? Like I can just be nice about it. And I think you're going to know what I'm going to say. The answer is no. You cannot. It is not, this intention is not like this get out of jail free card. Like, well, I had a good intention, so, oh, well, no. Intention is not necessarily related to impact. And that's like that little, how was that question is like, how did that go for you? How was that? And then it's like, that was bad. That was good, whatever. My intention is to support and develop this team. I hate lean. And I've literally, this is like a common kind of interaction, I think, is like people have good intentions. And so they think, like brush their hands off and they're done. But that doesn't always mean the person you're coaching is having a positive experience. So with that, I just invite you to continue asking questions of yourself, to build your own awareness. Are your learners, your coachees experiencing more positive or negative emotion during your coaching? And how do you know? And what about you? What emotions are you experiencing and how are those impacting the people that you're working with? And, what do you notice about that? And what do you notice about your ability to manage those and work differently in order to have a different impact? Those are the things that I'm thinking about. Invite you to do the same. And what I really think is that I offer all of this to say, like, I just think we can do better. I think we can do better as lean coaches when we kind of like recognize this landscape and role around emotions and motivations and the impact they have on our brains and our ability to learn. So that's all I had. I'd love to answer questions if there are any. Yep, and I'd love you to connect with me too. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, so it'd be great to meet some of you there.
You've got some, you're sparking a lot of conversation here. So let's see. Manuel was saying he loves coaching and receiving coaching, planned or not, but sees some managers with an attitude of arrogance. So I'm thinking that's sort of one of those negative sparkers. Olga is connecting this with respect for people, which is nice.
Yeah.
Corey said this brings up the list of questions, or the bringing up kind of good stock questions reminds him of The Coaching Habit. There was some good.
Yes.
Another good book.
The Coaching Habit is great. Michael Buquet-Stanier. Yes. Yeah,
I go back to that a lot. And also these little check-ins. This is Corey saying, love the little check-ins, not too much to disrupt the session, but a great gauge to determine if you need to circle back. So
yeah,
little but good indicators. And your focus on intentions. Jennifer said that reminded her of the road to hell.
Oh, good intentions are
good intentions. Yeah.
Pave the way. Yeah. That is.
Stephanie loved that. How was that?
Yeah.
Let's see. And Olga is thanking you. This is incredibly helpful in inviting. And the group comments have been really. You're getting a lot of that. Was great. Corey said Katie Anderson also talks a lot about self-questioning a lot, what is my intent when having these sessions? Thank you. Informative, really appreciate what I learned today. So many excellent takeaways, Dorsey. Thank you so much for letting us learn from you today. Ruth said, I love your thinking, Dorsey. It always sparks some new learning and self-reflection. Wendy, really appreciate. Richard, can anyone share an aha moment for a learner when they finally buy into lean? That's a bigger question for the group. Cindy says, thank you so much. Corey shared Katie's site, and then Angela, wonderful presentation. Love the neuroscience between the understanding, impact, and intent. Excellent takeaways. So you sparked in me too. This is great. It's really, really helpful.
Cool.
Well, let me review a little bit about what's coming up for folks. And then this is an upcoming webinar, and I'm gonna come back to a question for you from the group.
Okay.
But this one is Joy Mason's webinar is coming up. Joy basically said, when she talks to managers, she largely when she asks them how they feel, she says they feel overwhelmed, when she asks them about diversity, equity, and inclusion, otherwise known as DEI, and that leaders are finding themselves overwhelmed by recent demographic and cultural shifts and uncertain what to do next. So unfortunately, traditional DEI training doesn't appear to have the answers. And she said there's a growing trend toward applying a continuous improvement to diversity and equity. So she's going to run a webinar on how to apply Six Sigma to help us move from difficult feelings, there's feelings again, to effective action. Learn a 5-step roadmap for diversity and equity, and stay positive and encouraged. Ooh, there's some more of that. I'll just put the link in there for you folks. And then the other thing I want to mention is the current podcast. And that is with Jamie Flinchbaugh. And if you do not know Jamie, what a wonderful human being, supremely wise, fascinating, intelligent, just came out with a new book, very people-centered and focused on coaching, actually, saying that is kind of the crux of what makes things work. So that really aligns with kind of this conversation today, but just saying it's people that solve the problem. So how do we coach them so that we can really help them? All right, so then I want to come back to you. So I've given you, I think, links to both of those, so you can check them out or sign up. Now I want to come back. Okay. Pilar asks, what would be your advice when you get a comment while preparing a lean leadership training, including creating psychological safety and consistent kindness, saying, quote, oh, we should remove the word kindness. It's going to turn off so-and-so, and he'll tune right out. So how do you have advice on that one? That's sort of another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. It's like, we're not going to talk like, that's too like touchy-feely, or that's too uncomfortable, or we're not going to talk about kindness or compassion or emotions or any of that. It's like, I mean, my advice is like we have to talk about it. I think this isn't new. There's tons of data and research that shows that we need to create these safe environments in order for people to be creative and innovative and to solve problems effectively. So it's kind of like, my advice is, I guess, to say, why do you think it's important, and to, kind of speak up about what were you thinking when you wanted to include that consistent kindness, and to kind of advocate for that. I mean, I believe in it wholeheartedly, and I think it's not new. The idea of emotional intelligence and the importance of that. I mean, it's like the early 90s when that research came out, and it's hard to talk about in organizations.
And I often find that we make assumptions, and this sounds like, Pilar, you're getting someone who's making an assumption about someone else's receptivity. And often our assumptions are off point. And it's the people who we think might be resistant that actually could make the most use of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm remembering working with I don't know if it was 3-star general at, might have been General Dynamics. And he really relied on my colleague and I, because we were going to go places he couldn't. So if you think about people that you might think, oh, they're not going to want to deal with emotion or whatever, they actually need someone else to facilitate those conversations or let that be a topic. And so you're the facilitator. I don't know if that's going to be helpful, but anyway, yes, I agreed.
The other thing that strikes me is like to kind of pose it and say, we've included this intentionally, and what do you all as receivers of this lean leadership training think about this being included? What does this word mean to you? Why is this important? Why is it not important? I mean, it'd be interesting to just get it out there and to have people, if they're turned off by talking about it, that's an important conversation to have, is what I would say. And that's making the invisible visible, instead of making an assumption and eliminating it. Let's talk about why kindness is a turnoff, or uncomfortable for people.
That's great, Dorsey. That's great. Thank you so much, Dorsey, for coming to the cafe. This was a massively fabulous education, great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. And I look forward to seeing you guys at the next one. Take care, Dorsey. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Elizabeth.